Hello and welcome. So in this video we are going to be talking about how Mary I became known as Bloody Mary, and also, was Mary actually the bloodiest Tudor? Mary was the only surviving child of King Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. She was born on the 18th of February 1516 in Greenwich. Mary's parents divorced in 1533, with her father splitting the church in England away from the control of the church in Rome. So even though Henry had taken the control of the church in England away from the church in Rome and the Pope, Henry was still a Catholic, so the country was still technically Catholic, but there was this new religion coming in, and this was the Protestant faith. The only difference between the Catholic faith in Rome and the Catholic faith in England was that the Pope was still the head of the normal Catholic Church, whereas Henry had made himself the head of the church in England, so he had the control over this instead of the Pope. So Mary still kept her Catholic faith of the Pope being the head of the Catholic Church. But Mary's younger half-brother Edward was raised more in the Protestant faith. So when he became king after the death of his father in 1547, he carried on the Reformation with the church that his father had started, but instead of saying like mainly Catholic, he completely turned the church towards the Protestant faith. So Edward and Mary were often at loggerheads over the fact that Mary still had the Catholic faith, so much so that Edward had actually appointed as his heir his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, who was a Protestant. So when King Edward died at the age of 15, Lady Jane Grey did become queen, but she was unpopular with the people, and Mary was actually really popular with the people of England, even though she did have their Catholic faith, mainly because her mother had been really popular and they did feel sorry for her about the way that her mother was treated and then how Mary was made illegitimate because of this. Because Mary was so popular with the people, she was actually able to take the throne off of Lady Jane Grey and become Queen of England. And once she was Queen of England, Mary set about turning England back to the Catholic faith with the Pope as the head of the church. So it soon became clear that the Protestants were in danger. Now, some of them managed to flee abroad into exile, but many were unable to do this. Mary's execution of Protestants started in February 1555 and lasted until her death in 1558. In total, Mary had 285 people executed for heresy, with 56 of those being women. So even though the main form of execution for people who had been found guilty of heresy was to burn them, burnings were the rarest form of punishment in Tudor England. So Mary burning the heretics at the stake was designed to be a shock. Now, many of the Protestants that were burned at the stake were martyred, including the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. Now, Thomas had actually recanted his beliefs 6 times, but Mary still had him burned, probably because he was basically the source of her unhappiness, because he had brought about her parents' divorce. But the reason why we think about Mary the way we do today and how she is Bloody Mary is all down to the martyrologist John Foxe. In 1563, he published his book, The Acts and Monuments, better known as Foxe's Book of Martyrs. This book gives a detailed account of all of the martyrs who lost their life for their faith under the Catholic Church. His book was extremely popular, and it did actually go through 4 editions in his lifetime. So that was how Mary came to be known as Bloody Mary, because of her execution of all the Protestant heretics. But was she really the bloodiest Tudor? So it has been estimated that her father, King Henry VIII, had between 50,000 and 70,000 people executed during his reign. I personally feel this might be a little bit of an exaggeration. I do admit that he probably did execute a lot of people, but I really don't think it could have been up to 70,000. Now, Mary's sister, Elizabeth I, who became queen after Mary, she also did have a lot of people executed too. Out of all these people that Henry VIII and Elizabeth I had executed, I did try to find out which one of those were just for heresy alone. And the only source I can find for that, and it's literally like the only sources that is referenced in about other articles and that, is from Wikipedia. It says for heresy, Henry VIII only executed 132 people, while Elizabeth I executed 190 people. So going by just the execution of heretics alone, then Mary was the most bloodiest. But one of the reasons I feel why Mary gets her name of Bloody Mary and not her father, even if he did execute all these people, is because of the short space of time that Mary's executions lasted. So Mary's whole entire reign only lasted for 5 years, with 3 of these years taken up with the Protestant burnings, whereas the executions in her father's reign were over a 37-year period, and then the executions in her sister's reign was over a 45-year period. I just think it mainly goes down to the shock value of these 284 executions just happening in this short space of time, and also that Mary's executions of the Protestants was like a targeted thing, whereas in like the other reigns something sort of bad might happen, so all these people would be like executed for heresy, but other than that it might just be one person here and there if they decided to preach something that wasn't liked, and that, well, yeah, like I said, as for Mary's just be like a targeted thing against the Protestants. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Why do you think Mary became known as the bloodiest Tudor, whereas the other members of her family didn't, even though they were technically worse overall for the amount of people they had executed? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.